Hello everyone, hope you're well. This is the Easter School session. It's aimed at those students that are going to be working independently at home for you to complete in your own time over Easter. Okay. Um, so um, it's designed to last around about 2 hours, but I'm going to be going through each section quite quickly just to explain what you need to be getting on with, just to give you some little tips along the way. So the first hour that you're going to be spending will be on people's health, second hour Elizabethans, but there are ideas of other things that you need to be doing. So what I'm not suggesting here is that 2 hours is enough revision for you to complete ready for the next assessment, but the tasks involved in this should last around about 2 hours. You've been told to complete this independently, and we want them into teams. I'm going to set up an assignment, and that's due in on the 8th of April, but you can do it any time before then if you wish. So just in case there's certain sections where you might be handwriting things, so you're taking pictures, or you've decided to complete work elsewhere, not within the PowerPoint that's in assignments, then you can upload the work, and it's just some instructions there to help you with that if you need to do that. So the first thing, you'll recognise this quiz. You should have done it with your teacher last lesson. And your teacher probably would have told you that all of the knowledge within these questions is knowledge that will be relevant in your next assessment. So what I'd suggest you do now is pause the video, have a go at the question, see what you can remember, okay, and then the answers are on the next slide. So pause it, have a go, and then you can check your answers. So here are the answers, quite a lot of detail on there. This is actually, I put some answers in there with some supplementary ideas within there, just that might help you as well. So go through this now, have a look at your answers. If there's anything that you thought you were a little bit weak on, that you didn't have specific detailed knowledge to support your answer when you were doing this, then have a little look through this now. Go back, maybe after this session, after you've done some more revision on some of these topics, you can have another go at this quiz and see if you can do better as a result of that. Remember, revision is a cycle. It's not a matter of just reading or creating notes. It's about revising something, testing yourself, looking at the areas of weakness, and trying to make improvements. And the reason why I've started to smile is I've just read a little bit of a mistake there, but I'm going to leave it here. It does say improvements in pubic health instead of public health. Bit of a typo there. So anyway, I'll move on. So just a reminder here of how your sessions are going to work. This is Easter School, so we're in Easter. We've also got intervention sessions, but if you're doing it at home independently, the Easter School, you've not been invited to those. Please don't worry about it if you've not been invited to those sessions. They won't be appropriate probably for you. You'll be given plenty of things to do, and I'm sure you will benefit from just working independently on those resources. They're more aimed at students that we feel need a little bit more support with certain things. But it doesn't mean that you're getting treated unfairly. It's actually that we think you will do better left to your own devices. That's why we've asked you to do this independently as well. So that's on the 13th of April, but you needn't worry about that one. Then we've got a lesson on the 22nd of April. We'll do a little bit more revision in the morning, but don't expect your teacher to be going through content. It'll be a matter of giving you a bit of independent time just to go over your notes, go over your mind maps, your revision diagrams, cards, and prepare for the assessment, which we'll do. It says PM, but at about 10 past 11 after break time, you'll be completing another paper one based on those topics that you've been told about, and that'll last an hour and 45 minutes. 4th of May is quite an important date. We've not got a lesson on that day, but you'll receive an indicative grade. I'll be talking to your parents about this on Parents' Evening, and your teachers will be as well. But essentially what we'll be saying there is, if you carry on working in the way that you're working, trying hopefully really hard, like you are doing so, and you replicate or maybe even improve upon those grades that you've got previously, then this is what we think you will get, but there is a chance to improve from there. So if we give you an indicative grade of, let's say, a 5, doesn't mean that your final teacher assessed grade will be a 5. We're saying that at the moment that's where you are, but you can improve, and that will take into account your results from the 22nd of April on there. We're going to turn this around very quickly, mark them, moderate them in time, so that we try and give you as accurate indicative grade as we possibly can. Then we do more revision, but in this, then we start looking at paper 3. So we've got the 10th and the 11th to go over some key topics for living under Nazi rule and then making of America. And then on the 28th of May, you'll have your final assessment, or at least for most of you, which you'll complete in school, another 1 hour and 45 minutes. And that's really it. They're the main things. On the right hand side, you've just got some of the things that we're going to use to come up with, first of all, your indicative grade, but then your teacher assessed grade. So as you're going through this PowerPoint, you see this blue section just here. It says others will just be given the work to complete independently, and then it's handed in on the 8th of April. So anything that you see like that within this PowerPoint is referring to you. Okay. It's just got some reminders on this slide of things, the topics that you need to revise, which we'll go through again later on, and some other things that might be important to you. So if you want to have a little pause of this and have a look, then that's fine. Okay, so to start off with, you're going to look at people's health. 2 parts to this. Firstly, we're just going to do making sure that we revise a key topic that's going to come up, and then you're also going to look at practice question. This is the practice question that you're going to have a look at. Obviously, this isn't a question that is going to be on your assessment, but I do believe that it will be helpful to have a go at this question. So write a clear and organised summary that analyses local and national government public health in medieval England. Okay. So to start off with, you'll recognise this because you should have done this with your teacher, where you created a mind map. You may have done some of it, you may have done all of it. This is the first part of this. So you may have already finished this, and that's great. So don't feel like you have to redo this. If you've got a poster with this on, a piece of paper with this on, it's already done, it's already to a good standard, and you're using it to help you to revise, then you can just take a photo of that, and then you can just upload that onto assignments by the date that's given on there. Okay, so the idea of this was you're looking at public health improvements. It's a question mark because also you might need to also know not just what improvements were made in public health, and this is within the medieval period, I should say, but actually why there was very little done. So there were some things done, you need to know about those things, but actually a lot was not done, particularly when you compare it to later periods, particularly in the industrial and the modern period, and you need to know reasons. The reasons are on the right, they're already done for you on this version. You would then need to do improvements in London, town authority improvements, that's basically local government improvements outside of London, maybe Norwich or Bristol, or there's lots of examples from around the country, and the developments in monasteries as well, which strictly speaking isn't public health, but actually will be relevant to the question that you are given in your actual assessment, so it'll definitely be worth having a look at that. You were given some little revision booklets that had photocopied pages out of this textbook here, which some of you I know have already. So you have the photocopies of page 10, so you can get the information to fill in your diagram there, and I just want to make sure that you've done that, so if you could submit that, you may have already done that. Okay. That space, if you want to do, if you've not done it already, you can do it on the computer if you wish, like I've done it. You could use the space to complete it on there, but you can complete it on paper and take a photo, like I said. So then you're going to have a go at a question. This is write a clear and organised summary that analyses local and national public health responses to public health issues in medieval England. So you're going to have a go at answering this question. Okay. So the first thing to ask yourself is how many paragraphs this is going to be, and it's 2. So write an extra paragraph if you have time, though at the end we've spoken about that. If you want to pause it after each one of these questions so you can have a think about it for yourself, you can do, but I'm pretty aware that most of you probably know a lot of this. So remember, there's a couple of reasons why we ask you to do an extra paragraph if you've got time. Actually, one of them's there's only one relevant one now, because when we look at the mark scheme, it will be 2 paragraphs that we'll mark. But as I've seen from students' work, you might do 3 paragraphs. One of them might be irrelevant, might be wrong, you might not get the marks for. But if the third paragraph does, then you could still get 9 marks. So you don't get negative marks for a poor paragraph. So you can always go back, particularly if you've been a bit unsure, like you've answered the question but you're unsure about one of the paragraphs, you can go back and do that one. It's a bit of a tip there that might could end up getting you an extra 3 or 4 marks. So how long should you spend on this type of question? You might want to pause it before I give you the answer. So it's about 10 to 12 minutes. Remember, if you kind of follow a minute a mark, you can't go too wrong really. But 10 to 12 minutes is pretty good. What's the focus of this question? So remember, when you go look at the question, I expect you then to underline the key focus of the question. So if you want to have a think about that and pause it, what would you underline in this question? It would be local and national government responses. So you're talking about government responses. It could be local and national. And remember, it's responses. You're not looking at necessarily the causes, although those causes could impact upon the responses of local and national government, but you're looking at government responses in this answer. What might the trap be then? Might pause it and have a little think about what do you think students might fall into trap of here, and they might discuss responses of ordinary people, for example flagellants, which isn't a government response. Okay. Also talking about monasteries in this particular type of question is probably going to be irrelevant because it's not a national government or a local government response. Okay, so you just need to be careful not to talk about those things or talk about monasteries in your answer. So now once you've thought about that, you can have a go at writing your 2 paragraphs. Okay, have a go at writing it now if you want. You can pause it. I'm going to move on, and remember this needs to be complete it's the 2nd week of the Easter holidays. I keep forgetting what date it is, but I think it's the Thursday. If you get that onto Teams and get that done. Right, so you've had a go at doing it, so please do have a go at doing it before you look at this, but there's a model paragraph here, so if you've not had a go at doing it and you're just kind of going through it, I'd stop it now. Have a go at doing a paragraph, plan it, do it properly, and then you can have a look at this model paragraph. So one response, local government response, very poorly written, that attempted to improve the urban environment was some towns tried to solve the problem of dung heaps. Places like Bristol and York moved the dung heaps to the edge of towns. The result of this was there was less bacteria in towns, so less chance of diseases spreading. So does this have a valid point, detailed evidence and an explanation? Have a little think about it, you can pause it. Well, yes it does. I mean, it's not written very well. I've just realised that I've said the word response twice, probably too much there, and it doesn't really make sense at the beginning. But actually even take that out of it, if I had that answer, you would still, there's a valid point. It's not maybe as detailed as it could be, but there is enough detail, a detailed specific example, and it is based on a 2nd order concept because it uses the term the result of this, a consequence in other words, so this is consequence. So the evidence could be more detailed. It could add another example in there, so you could put another example and a problem of local governments tried to solve in there if you wish to do so. How could you bring diversity into this response? So have a little think about that. So this answer has talked about consequence, but could you actually bring diversity into this response as well? So that's how it affected maybe different groups of people. Yeah, it could have spoken about rich and poor, possibly. Rich lived in towns at this time, poor on the outskirts. This was an example of how rich were basically helping themselves by moving the problem elsewhere, so it wasn't so much of a problem for them. And what might they have included in a second or even a third paragraph? Have a little think about what you might have done here and pause it. Okay, and there's some examples just there. You might have to look at your version of that PowerPoint to see them properly, as my face is currently in the way at the moment, but it's on assignments, so you can have a look at examples of how London tried to help public health, might be one. And you might talk actually about how explain why local and national government responses were limited. So that would be looking at cause. Okay, so they didn't know the causes of public health issues, and so, as such focused more on religion, and they didn't see it as their role. So you could have spoken about things like that in this response as well. Okay, so if you should have already had a go at it, you've seen this bit of feedback, use that to go back to your own and just double check that you think that you've kind of covered, you're not fell into any of those traps, that you've got a valid point, you've backed it up with evidence, it's detailed, have you used a couple of examples if you can, have you based your answer on a second order concept. You can do multiple second order concepts, by the way, like one paragraph could be cause and consequence, or just cause, one could be consequence, one could be diversity. That's absolutely fine, doesn't need to just be one. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at the Elizabethan section. So same as before, we're going to look at a particular key topic. Okay, so the fact that on the People's Health section we chose a specific topic to go over in lesson and go over again and make sure you know it, you know, take my advice please on that one. So there were people on the last paper that, even though we seem to hammer the topic of theatre, still seem to know very little about theatre when they're actually writing the answer. Don't make that mistake again if that was you. So in similar thing in the Elizabethan section, so have a go at some key knowledge, and then we're going to have a go at a particular type of question. This is a type of question that people did struggle with. It was the interpretations, where you're given two and then you have to comment on the impression that they both give. That was a word that we used again and again, which I'll be using again today, and you basically need to explain how they are different and why they are different. So it's 2 paragraphs, but we're talking about that a little bit later. So similar to before, my class anyway, we did one card together where I put some key questions, which again can be found in the revision book. I gave you the particular pages that are in there. Now, if you're doing this and you think, oh, I can't find those pages, it's all on the, you'll find the information anyway on the knowledge organisers that I've also put on Show You My Homework, which will also be on the team's assignment. So that'll all be in there to help you anyway. So there's some key questions on the left of which will be on the front of your card. And this one's to do with the labouring poor. And then on the back you'll have the answers. The idea being that you someone can test you on those, or you can try and answer the questions yourself and then have a look at the answers, or get whoever's helping you to kind of mark you on how you did. And if there was anything that you were struggled on, so let's say you just didn't really know what the houses were like for the poor, then you would obviously go back to that and just go over that section again, and then retest yourself at a later time, just to make sure that that has been ingrained in your mind. Obviously, if you've already done this on some paper, then you can take a photo of this and just upload it onto assignments to show that you've done it. And then I've actually this time added some key questions for the other sections. So the middling sort, you've got some key questions, make sure you've answered those. If you've already done them, but maybe there's a few key questions on there that you've not quite done in as much detail as you should have done, then maybe have a go at doing that. Here's the gentry questions. Go away, get those done. Okay, so make sure you do this before having a go at the question. Okay. So this is something for you to have a little think about. Obviously, those that are coming into Easter school, That's something we were going to just briefly discuss. But which class would you like to have belonged to? Which class would you not? It's a pretty obvious answer, but just have a think about comparing the classes and what type of life they would have had, because that might be quite useful. Okay. Right, so here was a question or type of question that people seem to generally struggle with. Even those that did reasonably well, it was like we were all marking them. We were finding the answer in there, but it wasn't in the easiest format, and there's easier ways of picking up the marks than some of you actually showed. So even those that got maybe 10 or 11 out of 12, they weren't always the best answers. I'm hoping that this session will just hammer some key points home. So you've got two sources, and you're thinking about how they are different and why they are different. So first step, so pause it while you're thinking about this, underline or highlight the key focus of this particular question. So have a real think about it while you're doing it. So as you go through it on your questions, just have a think, okay, it's about home life, isn't it? So I'm going to focus on that, because some of you made the mistake of just comparing them quite generally. You need to make sure that you're focusing on whatever the focus of this particular question is. So it's home life, okay? Read the sources, including the provenance. Remember, the provenance is this bit at the top, okay, on both the sources, which tells you who created, what type of source it is, when it was created. But for the first paragraph, it's not actually that relevant, but it's worth reading it because it might help you understand why they're discussing the topic in the way that they are, and it might get you thinking about that aspect of it. But initially, it's the main source that you'll be concerned with. And you're just going to highlight anything that tells you about home life. So as I'm reading interpretation C, I might read it. So I've already read the provenance. If you woke up in the morning and suddenly found yourself in the 16th century family, you might be surprised at how familiar everything seems. So I might go, okay, it's talking about it being quite familiar. It's talking about lumpy straw mattresses. It's actually saying that that's a bit different, because hopefully we don't have lumpy straw mattresses. But then it talks about some things that are maybe quite familiar. So things like sitting round a breakfast table and eating bread and butter before going to work. These are all things that are familiar. There are things within that aren't, but it certainly seems to be saying that life is actually, home life is kind of similar to what you'd expect today. Then you would read through the second source and do the same thing. Then, when you read the two, think about just the general impression about home life. Okay, so you would read both of them and think, okay, what is the impression this is giving about home life? And what is the impression of the other one? Okay, and it will be different, okay, because that's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on the differences. Although you can get marks for similarities, and if you can't think of differences at all, you can do it. Really, you're much better off doing differences. It's more straightforward. You're likely to get more marks, and it helps the second paragraph better if you do that. Okay. Once you've given the overall impression, you might just then start thinking about the provenance and thinking about, okay, why have they said what they've said? So you might underline certain bits of the provenance that might show you that. Okay. So once you've done that, then you would be in a position to actually answer the question. So I would fully expect on your exam papers, when they're being marked, that I'm looking at fully annotated sources, that you've underlined key things, you've written the impression of both of them. These are all things that are going to help you follow that process before answering the question. It will help you, I promise, okay? So you're going to have a go at answering the question in 2 paragraphs on here. So have a go now, please. Well, obviously go back and make sure you're happy at knowing what the impression is, and then you can move on to the next slide. Right, so you should have had a go by now at answering this question in your 2 paragraphs. On this slide, you'll find an example paragraph 1, and what I want you to notice about it is the amount of times that the word impressions is used, just to really consolidate that idea that you're just giving an overall impression of the interpretation. and that interpretation and that impression is on the specific focus of the question, which is home life. So look at how many times home life is used in the answer. There's some other bits that I've highlighted in red just to show you, as well as home life and impression. This idea of the sources maybe being familiar. So in interpretation C, it's kind of giving the impression, isn't it, that if you were to time travel into an Elizabethan home, that it'd be very familiar for you. It even says it in that one. And if you notice in interpretation D, it's kind of saying it's not familiar. It's very different to what you'd expect. So I'd guess that they're the main impressions that you'd be talking about. So have a look at your answer. Have a look at this answer, and then just in purple or in a different colour if you can, just make your answer a little bit better using this answer just here. So paragraph 2, I've just done an example paragraph 2 to give those people an idea of the type of thing that you might write. So remember, you're thinking about the audience and purpose for the second paragraph. So you're thinking about why interpretation C has an impression that it's familiar, and why interpretation D is saying that it's unfamiliar. Well, if you have a think about the actual provenance of the sources and the audience and purpose of them, you should be able to hopefully work out that in interpretation C, it's focused on an online schools resource. Okay, so that might be why they're trying to maybe relate the topic to the school children. So they're maybe oversimplifying it just so that school children can relate to it and understand it and engage with it better. Whereas interpretation D was written by a historian, so it's probably aimed at an older audience, a more mature audience, probably a more educated audience. As a result of that, there's no need to, I guess, dumb it down or try and make it relatable to the audience, because this particular audience probably just want to know realistically what it was like. That is of more interest to that audience. So this is to give you an idea of the types of things that you can write on this type of question. You need to think about the audience, the purpose, and how that makes the interpretation different. Okay, not which is more useful, which is more reliable. Okay, that's not what it's asking. It's asking why the interpretations are different. You don't need to make a judgment on, oh yeah, interpretation D is more useful because it's written to a historian, but interpretation C is less useful because it's for children. Okay, that's not what the question's asking. You've got to explain the differences, not say which source is more useful. Okay, so have a careful think about that when you do the next assessment. So just a reminder of things that you can do between now and the next assessment. So the highlighted bits are about Easter School. So if you've been working on this independently, you need to get all of this work done and submitted on Teams by the 8th of April, and teachers will be checking that you've done that. On Show My Homework and on Teams, there are revision resources like knowledge organisers, timeline activities and things like that posted for you. But on this PowerPoint as well, you'll notice that there are some additional resources which I'm just going to talk through with you. There's an intervention session, but that's aimed at the students that will be coming into school over Easter. And just make sure you revise the topics that are on this page, okay, that you're absolutely confident with them. You know, you test yourself, make sure there's no gaps in your knowledge. There's no excuse not to do that. You don't need to revise everything, so you should be able to do that. Make sure you understand how to write peel paragraphs. Maybe just go over those source questions, and if you want to, any practice on any more source questions, if you want to come and see me or your teacher, I'm sure we could dig some out and you can have a go at them just to maybe get your skills up before the next session if that's what you want to do. Okay, so I'm just going to explain, there's a few other resources that you might want to use in your revision. So some revision ideas here. You could create a mind map of public health improvements. You could create a timeline of responses to HIV and AIDS. You could create some revision cards on the different threats to Elizabeth. And there I've listed some of the threats on the left-hand side, things like Babington, Throckmorton with Mary Queen of Scots, Walsingham's spies, the difference between conformers, church papists, plotters, recusants, and so on and so forth. And you can have a go at practice questions, which you'll find in the on Show My Homework and on Teams, and you can have a go at answering some questions. Try and pick questions that where they relate to the topics on here. You know, I won't necessarily have a go at practice questions that aren't to do with the topic. So have a look through the questions and think, oh, that's a question I might want to have a go at. So you can use knowledge organisers, the photocopies from the revision books. You could use your exercise books, GCSE Pod. There's lots of things that you can use now to revise. So I've created some templates, I guess, for you to use. So when you're doing the public health improvements in the industrial period, you could have 3 branches coming off, and then what I've done is ask some questions which you could answer on the sub branches that come off those. And if you do that, revise it, quiz yourself, then you should be in a position to answer at least one of the questions in the next assessment. This is very basic, but responses to HIV AIDS over time. So have a think about the early responses between 80 and 85, the growing understanding between 85 and 95, and then complacency from 95 onwards, with some examples on there. That will definitely be really useful in a nice visual way of you remembering some of the key dates and the key periods. I think that will be a really good activity for you to do for at least one of the questions. Then revision cards for Elizabethan threats. I've put some questions on the left hand side for you, and you can answer them on the other side by using the revision materials, revise them, test yourself. So I've done one for the Spanish Armada, one for Mary Queen of Scots, one for why the threat faded, and one for anti-Catholic laws. So if you answer those questions, revise them, then that will put you in a really good position. An example of a top trumps card is you could do one about Drake, for example. So you could have maybe a picture that reminds you of some of the key things that Drake did. Put his name in, his aims, what his achievements were, but also what maybe his failure was as well. Okay, and then what I've done as well to make it even better for you is I've attached the knowledge organisers, but I've taken everything out that you don't need. On the knowledge organiser pages where you don't necessarily need to know everything, I've highlighted the sections in yellow that are important for you. So if you take a look at these, this is the medieval period for living conditions. That's probably quite useful to revise all of that. The improvements in medieval period, you've got some examples from monasteries, you've got London, and you've got some examples of some other town authorities like Norwich, Bristol, Carlisle. These are some things that you definitely could do with know about. We've got Britain from 1750 to 1900 with some key changes. Remember, the ones that you probably really want to pay close attention to are the 1867 Working Class Men Get the Vote, Pasteur's Germ Theory, and the 1875 Public Health Act. The other ones will be useful and you can use them, but they're 3 that I seem to have been talking about quite a lot, so maybe focus on those ones. We've got responses to HIV AIDS, so you've got the phases. This is broken into 5 phases, but I think it's maybe easier if you kind of almost break it into 3, where it's like alarm is the first 2 phases, understanding is maybe phase 3 and phase 4, and then complacency is this last phase. I think it's just an easier way of remembering it rather than having to remember 5 different phases. So when you're doing your timeline activity, you can use these examples that are on here. This is why was there so few Catholics in England by 1603. So the activity that you can do for this one was the revision cards. So on here you've got examples to do with some of the anti-Catholic laws. You've got the Mary Queen of Scots threats, where you've got the Babington plot, the Throckmorton plot on there. Then you've got daily life in Elizabethan England, so you don't necessarily need to know all of this. So you definitely need to know these top sections about the gentry, the middling and the poor. Remember, you've done an activity where you should have done some revision cards on those 3 anyway, so make sure you learn those. It's also for the poor, it's probably you need to know about poverty as well, and the causes of poverty, and how and the poor law and how that may be impacted upon the poor as well. So those bits in yellow are quite important. On this section, adventures in Elizabethan England. Just the main thing is like an overview really, and just knowing about some of the key individuals, maybe a bit about Raleigh who's on here as well, but certainly just if you did a top trumps card, for example, about Drake, Lancaster maybe, John Dee, about any of those individuals, that should be fine. There's a bit about Drake on here, but you might want to try and find maybe a little bit more about him, possibly would be a good idea as well. Okay, and that is it. Okay, so obviously if you've got any questions, anything that you need to know, we're not going to be logging in all the time over Easter, but get the work done, do it the best that you can, hand it in on the day. If there's any issues, you can obviously email me if you want. I won't probably be looking that often, but I might do, but certainly I'll pick it up as soon as I'm back after a break. So yeah, okay, I hope you found this useful. Thanks a lot, bye.